Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm State Senator Jeff Klein, and I'm so proud to be joined here today by my two outstanding colleagues in government. Of course, our Attorney General, who has done an excellent job dealing with the foreclosure crisis from the minute he took office. And of course, Helene Weinstein, the chair of the Judiciary Committee in the Assembly. Together, over the last 7 years, every piece of legislation dealing with foreclosure, I was the Senate sponsor, she was the Assembly sponsor, and we really did a lot of good things to help homeowners here in New York. We're here today dealing with a very important issue. Just in the way of background, the foreclosure crisis 7 years ago in New York, I think, did a lot to sort of get ahead of the curve, to protect our communities, to protect homeowners, to make sure the dream of home ownership is alive, not only for this generation, but future generations. Here in the Supreme Court in Bronx County, I'm very proud that I was able to start one of the first foreclosure clinics, helping distressed homeowners stay in their home when they're faced in foreclosure. Together, Assemblywoman Weinstein and I protected communities by mandating that foreclosed properties actually be maintained by banks to make sure they don't become community eyesores. Last year, once again, we extended our settlement conferences, ensuring that distressed homeowners get to sit down face to face with a bank to try to get them out of foreclosure and let them keep their home. So today we're dealing with sort of the next step, zombie properties. Zombie properties are foreclosed properties. Sometimes they're not foreclosed properties, but they're certainly abandoned, and they wreak havoc in a community. First of all, for every foreclosed property on a block, property values of the surrounding homeowners go down anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 per foreclosed home. I don't have to tell you, when a dilapidated property, an abandoned property is on a block, it leads to crime. It leads to the community trying to figure out ways to make sure the other homes on their block don't actually go down and destroy the fabric of the community. So this legislation is very, very important because we're making a demand of the banks that they need to do something. We're making a demand on the banks that they have to maintain these properties. And our legislation is very, very simple. When a home is actually abandoned or vacant, the bank has to act. They shouldn't have to wait until it's foreclosed upon. It shouldn't have to wait until the home actually changes hands. They need to act immediately, and that's something that's extremely, extremely important. We're also requiring that the lending institutions take part in a registry, which will be under the auspices of the Attorney General's offices, which will allow community members to actually call in and identify any abandoned or vacant home on the block. Again, so we can get ahead of the curve and we can make sure that these properties don't actually fall into even further disrepair. This is extremely important because what we see in many cases is we have a law on the books that requires that banks maintain foreclosed properties. Those are properties that already have a judgment of foreclosure. But we're seeing time and time again, banks aren't bringing foreclosure proceedings because they clearly don't want to maintain these properties. They want to ignore these properties. So I think we need to make sure that the banks are required to maintain a property as soon as they know it's abandoned and the homeowner is no longer living there. I don't think that's too much to ask. The only thing we're asking is the banks do anything any other homeowner would have to. Maintain a property so it remains something that can fit in to the nature of the community. So this is something that's extremely important. I think this legislation has to become one of our major priorities heading into the last 2 months of session. And I'm hopeful it'll pass the Senate, pass the Assembly, and then signed into law by the governor with the help of our Attorney General. Next up, I'd like to introduce someone who has done so much on a whole array of issues, consumer issues, but especially making sure that lending institutions, which caused this financial crisis, and we're still seeing the remnants of it today, and homeowners are taken care of. I'd like to introduce our outstanding Attorney General in the state of New York, Attorney General Eric Schneiderman.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being with us today. As you can see from the turnout, this is an issue that a lot of people are concerned about and passionate about, as well they should be. Ladies and gentlemen, there are zombies in the Bronx. And Jeff and Helene have, as Jeff noted, been the leaders in the New York State Legislature in trying to deal with issues related to lending, foreclosure, and all related matters. And I'm very proud of the fact that they're sponsoring the zombie legislation bill today, which is has been introduced in both houses, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it. It's even better than the legislation we proposed last year. But it's important to put this in a little bit of context. When I took office in January of 2011, we were still in the midst of a very major foreclosure crisis. And while other states have cleared their market faster, New York, because our foreclosure process takes longer, is still lagging behind. Foreclosure starts in New York went up in the last year, and if there's anything that I am proud of from my first term, it's working to hold the big banks accountable who participated in the conduct that led to the crash of the housing market and the crash of the economy, and hold them accountable in a way that requires them to give back to the communities and the families who were hurt by the crash. I am proud of the fact that the President of the United States appointed me to chair an unprecedented national state working group to investigate the cause of the housing crisis and to try and create these programs, and we've had tremendous success. Since we formed the working group in the summer of 2012, we've recovered over $60 billion nationally in relief for local governments, other agencies, and for families and communities hurt by the crash. In New York, we used a portion of these funds to create the Homeowner Protection Program, or HOP, which is a network of about 90 housing counseling and legal services providers all over the state. And I think there's some members of our HOP network here with us today. The HOP network was dedicated to the principle that no one should lose their home because they can't get to a lawyer. And I'm pleased to say that we're making good on that commitment. HOP lawyers and housing counselors have already seen more than 40,000 New York families. And they work with organizations in the Bronx like Legal Aid NYC, the Porodnik Foundation, and Neighborhood Housing Services of New York. We quickly realized, after we started helping families and keeping people in their homes, and the HOP program has been very successful in informing people about modifications to loans they were eligible for and keeping people from being foreclosed on. But we realized that even if you kept your home, if you're on a street with a bunch of abandoned properties, you're also a victim of the crash. Your entire community is damaged. Property values go down, crime, arson, and vandalism go up. It's a huge burden on local communities. So our first step in resolving the abandoned property issue was to fund land banks, which are nonprofits associated with local government that can buy abandoned properties, rehab them, resell them for housing, rent them, whatever they want to do. And that program has gotten underway and is quite successful, except that we realized there was yet another problem, and that problem is the problem of zombie properties, which we're here today to address. As Senator Klein mentioned, the fact is that local governments have a hard time even figuring out who owns a zombie property. The homeowners have abandoned them, the banks haven't completed foreclosure, and I've met with mayors all across the state of New York, police chiefs and others, who are concerned about the fact that we have an increasing number of abandoned properties that they can't do anything about. The number of zombie properties is going up. Last year in the Bronx, there was a 45% increase in the number of zombies. A lot of people think the foreclosure crisis is abating. In New York, foreclosure starts were up last year over the year before. This continues to be a problem in New York, and citywide, the zombie foreclosure rate went up by 35%, 38%. In the Bronx, though, 45% increase in zombies. So the solution to this is legislation, which I'm very confident my colleagues will be able to move through the Assembly and the Senate this year. As simple as the problem is, the legislation really addresses each issue raised by zombie properties. First, it requires the banks to provide homeowners early notice that they do not have to leave an abandoned property. We want people to stay in their homes and maintain them as long as possible. Second, the bill will make lenders responsible for maintaining the properties. Now, before Senator Klein and Weinstein passed the bill to make the banks responsible for maintaining the properties after foreclosure was complete, they weren't even doing that. This would simply move it up in the time frame so that once a property is abandoned and a bank has not completed foreclosure, they have to start maintaining it then. I think this will lead to them moving forward more quickly to foreclose on properties, and that'll clear the market. Finally, the bill will create a statewide registry of zombie properties that will be maintained by our office, and we will make that available to all the local governments in the state so they can deal with these issues. We have to ensure that the banks register the zombie properties and maintain them. If they don't, they'll be subject to fines, which will be collected by my office. And in this year's version of the bill, we have an additional 2 provisions. One of them requires that any fines collected go to local governments for the purpose of law enforcement and code enforcement. It goes to the local governments who are burdened with maintaining these properties, and we hope that there are not a lot of violations by the banks, but if there are, and my office will collect fines, and it's dedicated to local governments for code enforcement and property maintenance. The bill will also create an expedited foreclosure process to speed the process up so that banks that are doing the right thing and are maintaining the properties can move forward a little more quickly. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a simple problem. It has got a simple solution. The legislation sponsored by Assemblymember Weinstein and Senator Klein will stop the problem of zombie properties in communities all across the state, bringing down property values. It will stop the problem of zombie properties imposing huge burdens on local government to maintain them, and it will stop the problem of zombie properties being havens for crime and arson. We can solve all these problems by passing this bill. Thank you very much. I look forward to working with you to pass it, and I'm very, very hopeful that we're going to pass it before the end of this year's session.
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney General. Next up is someone, as I said earlier, has done so much work over the years as chair of the Judiciary Committee in the State Assembly. She cares deeply about the community she represents, as well as all communities throughout the state of New York. The chair of the Judiciary Committee, Assemblywoman Helene Weinstein.
Thank you, Senator Klein. As has been said, the issue of zombies, the issue of abandoned and vacant properties affects communities, cities throughout the state of New York. And I have, when I've gone to community meetings, I've explained to people, and I think people get it really quickly, that when folks say, "Well, I'm paying my mortgage, why should we be helping someone who doesn't pay theirs or who leaves their home?" And as has been said, the one abandoned property, one vacant property, one property in foreclosure brings down the value of the surrounding homes. 2 in a neighborhood brings it down further. 3 or 4 in the neighborhood brings down a whole community. And we're standing here to say that we want this to stop. It has an impact, tremendous impact on the city. We have made tremendous strides, Senator Klein and myself, over the years in changing how foreclosure proceeds in the courts. We've provided protections for homeowners. This is the most logical next step to maintain property, to force the lenders to maintain properties when they are vacant, when they are abandoned, whether they begin a foreclosure action and don't follow through with it and let it linger for months and years, or whether they just walk away and don't even start the action. Sometimes what happens when an individual homeowner receives a notice that they're going to be foreclosed, they wrongfully think they have to leave right away and abandon the property and that property then becomes vacant with no one maintaining it. One of the things this legislation does is have a notice to the homeowner that they are entitled to stay in that home until there's a court order that forces them out of that home. That's a very important provision so that people who want to fight the foreclosure have the ability to stay. You know, there's been comments made over the years that New York has a long process of foreclosure in the courts. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a good thing, because we've resisted efforts in our state to do what other states have done, which is to keep the courts out of the foreclosure system and to allow people's homes to be foreclosed without judicial intervention, without the protections of the courts. We've put a lot of protections in place. We're telling the lenders it's time to step up to the plate. You have to maintain these properties. The federal government actually requires under FHA and Freddie Mac for properties to be foreclosed, but there's not enforcement of those when there's an FHA mortgage. One of the things this legislation also does is now give the state the ability to enforce the provisions that already exist for the requirement of maintaining properties. There are over 1,000 zombies this year in Brooklyn, the borough I come from. I'd like this legislation to pass, and next year we can talk about that number going down. It really is a no-brainer. Someone needs to maintain these properties. The lenders can't lend the money, bring in action, and then walk away and leave the city of New York or leave localities to deal with the consequences and the homeowners to feel the pain of their property values going down. I look forward to continuing working to pass this legislation in the weeks we have left, the months we have left, and I look forward to continuing the relationship with Senator Klein in advancing protections for homeowners in our state.
Thank you. Thank you, Assemblywoman. I also want to say a very special thank you to a lot of the groups behind us, the community associations, all of the different legal entities that over the years have been really on the front line in helping distressed homeowners all over the Bronx, all over the city. I think you guys deserve a tremendous round of applause. As was said earlier, here in Bronx County, last year there was 600 zombie properties. Here to tell us a story of what happened on his community is Elvin Menner, the president of the Harding Park Homeowners Association.
Thank you, Senator Klein. As I said before, I am the president of the Harding Park Environmental Center Homeowners Association here. Presently 236 homes. Out of all those homes, 5 of them are zombies. One, just yesterday, I was advised that they were breaking into through the rear of the house. One has been vacant for 5 years. This one is in the process of being knocked down by the city because it's leaning towards the other homeowner. How would you like to be looking for a home in a nice neighborhood, and then you're driving down the street and what you see is an abandoned building, a house? You're not going to purchase the house next to them. Basically, your property value has gone down drastically. Let these banks know that this bill is the weapon that's going to stop them from abandoning these homes. And the people behind this bill is the ammo that these politicians need. And we support them 100%. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to take questions for a moment, but I do want to close out by saying something, a few lines in Espanol. Es un gran problema porque las viviendas abandonadas son un problema para las comunidades. Con esta ley, los bancos tendrán que mantener las propiedades vacantes durante y después de un barco de hipoteca. Es muy importante porque una propiedad abandonada alimenta el crimen, reduce la calidad de vida entre los vecinos y con esta ley el problema se fue. Thank you very much. And Senator,
Thank you. I also want to recognize we have with us Council Member Thomas from the City of Mount Vernon. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
all right. Questions? On topic.
Where the term zombie came from, why that word is
I mean, it's been used for a number of years. I think it originated a few years ago when the properties started to show up. There's been a lot of coverage about them, exposés, particularly some problems in the state of Florida, and I think it came out of that round. I don't know, but it certainly is evocative enough, and they are kind of zombies. They're in an in-between state. They're not alive and they're not dead.
That's basically.
Well, we have seen in the last few years banks, some banks, adopting a strategy that Senator Klein mentioned, that they may begin foreclosure proceedings, but then allow them to linger for sometimes they will actually withdraw the proceeding or stay the proceeding. There are some banks whose strategy is, we're not going to get enough money out of this property if we sell it, so let's just cut it adrift. And that has become more common in recent years. So the number of zombies, as I said, is going up. 45% increase in the Bronx in the last year is a huge increase in the number of zombies. So we want to pass the bill this year so we can make sure the banks maintain these properties, get the burden off local governments, and as Mr. Mann noted, help communities and help neighbors all over the state who are living with and dealing with these properties right now.
And also, just to add to that, what we've seen over the years, that lending institutions were very quick to foreclose on properties. Then lo and behold, they were in the real estate business, and they didn't want to be in the real estate business. They don't want to manage the properties adequately. So now they're reluctant to move for foreclosure because they know they're going to have to maintain the property. So what we're doing is sort of dealing with sort of a new problem, that now we need to force them to maintain these properties when they're abandoned and vacant before they actually get any worse.
Well, that's one of the provisions of this bill. It requires banks to advise the homeowners that they have the right to stay in the property once, even if it's they're falling behind in their mortgage or a foreclosure action has begun. So some banks have been more cooperative than others. We do have a process, and we do have a lot of, since we funded this network of legal services and housing counseling, we have a lot of banks reducing people's loans, keeping them in their homes, but people still believe they have to get out when they fall behind, when a foreclosure proceeding is commenced. So this bill will address that problem directly. It actually improves communication between the homeowner and the bank because it requires the banks to give them this notice that they can stay there. So that's one of the objectives here, but we think that this is a comprehensive bill that actually will enable us to deal with the problems of zombies in New York. Well, no, this is exactly the problem. The zombie properties are, by definition, properties that have been abandoned by homeowners. In the overwhelming majority of cases, it's people who just have fallen so far behind on their mortgage that they don't think they can ever get out. And so this is the only way to deal with it. Who ends up holding the burden is local government. And we have heard from mayors and police chiefs all around the state of New York. This is a huge burden on local governments, and it's something that we have to deal with.
There are, as the Attorney General said, as the numbers have gone up in the Bronx, so have they gone up in Brooklyn. As I said, over 1,000 properties are listed as zombie properties. Brooklyn's a big borough, and some of the communities that are hardest hit with zombie properties aren't the cool parts of Brooklyn. So I don't think it's unique to the borough, but it is similar to what's happening in other communities across the state where there have been increases in abandoned properties. And I hear from homeowners and from civic associations the same way as was described, that you have one or two homes where someone has left and it's just really destroys a neighborhood and destroys the property values. But I don't think Brooklyn is unique in what's happened there as what is happening across the state.
And as I noted earlier, citywide, there has been a 38% increase in the number of zombies in the last year. This is a problem that is getting worse, not better. So we're hopeful that this will deal with the problem in every community.
And I think what you're going to see is the same problem with zombie properties is what happened previously. Certain communities were clearly targeted with subprime loans 10 years ago. And more so, it's communities of color. African American and Latino communities are 4 times more likely to have gotten a subprime mortgage. And those are the communities that are still undergoing problems, and now with zombie properties as well.
The Bronx has had a faster rate of increase than the citywide average. A 45% increase in zombie properties in the Bronx in the last year. Citywide average is 38%. But if you have 10 zombies or 20 zombies, it's very important to understand that one abandoned property affects a whole street. So it could affect another dozen good families staying in their homes, and it's something that has to be addressed. And there is, believe me, across the state of New York, widespread support for doing this. Well, as Senator Klein noted, and I have to say, more than 10 years ago, Senator Klein was ahead of this time in talking about the problem of predatory lending and subprime mortgages. And by the time we got to 2006, 2007, banks were giving out negative amortization, balloon rate, no document loans, which I assure you no bank had ever heard of as of about 2004. So as the senator points out, a lot of the communities that got stuck with these bad loans were African American and Latino communities, and those are the mortgages that are most likely for people to have fallen behind on. Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Good job. Thank you. Appreciate it. I think hopefully we can get this done.